Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
So those two
Yep.
things, a little bit of knowledge and then knowing where to look. And it's worth noting here that if you can't find it by searching through the blogs manually, Google it. Corona SDK, topic, whatever word it is you think best represents the concept until you get a hit back, because you will get a hit back. So what's left? There's one other minor tweak. I'm going to take this bit of code out here and show you what happens. So let's say you've gotten this far. You've got the fill scale and you've got the horizontal scaling of the object. You got that working. But then you notice, oh, what is going on here? It's now supposed to represent 2, but it's like offset. And then it's not offset. And then it is offset. Again, this is one of those things where I kind of just knew as soon as I saw it. I didn't remember it at first, but then I saw it and I said, oh yeah, that's right. And what's going on here is the way the scaling or the filling works in Corona is it doesn't adjust to the relative scale of the object, it makes perfect sense. So what you need to do is you need to look at the value. Is it 1 or 2 or 3? Is it even or odd? And in the case where it is even, you need to adjust the fill X position by 1/2. And what that means is fill X can go between 0 and 1, and probably 0 and -1, but I don't do that. And what that does is it basically adjusts the starting point of the fill. So let me show you what would happen if I manually adjusted it, so this makes a little more sense. I'm gonna manually adjust it to some increment. We'll run it a couple of times here. So it starts off by default at 0. So everything looks right. However, if I change this to 0.1, so a little bit to the right, I think, a little bit to the left. Of course, it's going to be the opposite of whatever I say. Now it's a little bit offset. Then I can do 0.2, run it again, a little bit more offset. So what this is telling Corona is fill with this texture, but slide it over a little bit. So let's try minus 0.2 to see what happens. Should slide it over to the right. Yeah. Now the fill slides a little bit to the right. It's repeating, but it isn't perfectly centered. What you're in essence telling Corona is change how this is centered on the axis that you're repeating on. Now back to the original problem. The original problem is that we want to show one texture or one stretched texture, and then we want to show 2 and 3 and so on and so forth to represent our numeric value in the HUD. But the thing that happens here is that on odd values, it's offset incorrectly. Or I'm sorry, on even values, it's offset incorrectly. And so, knowing that there are only even and odd offsets here that we care about, I simply say if the scale modulo 2 is equal to 0, in other words, it's a multiple of 0, set the fill scale to 1/2. Slide it over halfway. So half the width of one texture. Otherwise, it's an odd number, 1, 3, 5, etc., and set it back to 0. And as soon as we do that, we fix our, it would stop if we would save our file. As soon as we do that, everything looks correct. So again, this is correct, but if I don't adjust the starting position, the start of the fill, then we get this little weirdity here, which might be cool. This might be fine. In fact, some HUDs, depending on how you're doing this, I wanted mine as discrete images, but maybe you've got like a pattern, and that's all you really want, then this might work perfectly well. So it's really dependent upon what you need. But in my case, I wanted a discrete image to represent one life or one bomb, and so I want to slide this over or not slide it over, depending on if it's even or odd. And so just put this little bit of code in here, and easy peasy lemon squeezy. That got no smile. I was trying for a smile out of Charles, but okay. So let's talk about.
I was so focused.
Shoot me.
I'm so focused.
Okay. That's good. All right, well, we're almost done with this topic, and then we can move on to maybe a little more interesting one, or at least a different kind of mental exercise. The second HUD you're seeing here, I talked about this already. So what I want is I want a HUD that visually represents the count to a certain point. So in this case, I want it to go up to 3, and then after that, I want it to show a numeric value and then just the icon representing my lives or whatever I'm using. And so I've used basically the same code. So I copied new HUD, and then I made a couple of more changes. So let's see. We did the texture wrapping. I created the image. I reset the texture wrapping. I set the value. And then I have this new parameter called limit. So if we look up here, you can see that limit is a value we can pass in. And for the one on the screen, I believe I set the limit to 4. Let me check down here. No, I set it to 3. Okay. So we'll look at the logic and see what that means. So the limit is 3 in this case. And so I'm storing that in the HUD so I can refer to it later. Now here's a new piece of code. So what we've done is I have created a label. And again, this is a very limited example. So you get what I give you, but you could expand this later or change the code to change the size of the text, the relative positioning, the font that is used, but I'm just using all the basics. So what I've done is I've created a new display object, a text object. I store that in a field called label on the HUD. I give it an initial text value of 1. I position it at the X and Y value initially, the same ones that are passed in. We use native system font and size 32. Now I know that initially I don't want to show this, so I set the visibility to 0 or false, that is. And then I know that I need to slide this over because I positioned it at X, and that's not correct. If I took this out and I ran this, it's probably a little bit hard to see here, but right here, the counter is right on top of the display object. Really what I want is I want it to the left of the display object. So I do that simply by saying HUD label X is equal to, makes it real big here, is equal to the current position of this HUD, a HUD.x, minus the content width of that HUD divided by 2 minus 5, and then I change the anchor for the label to be the right side. So in other words, if you save your code, in other words, that code says start here, subtract half the width of this object, and then add 5 more, or take 5 more pixels off and push it more to the left, and then say, okay, now align this object by the right edge, which is anchor x equals 1.